Hey all, your OS reviews. Recently we checked out a couple of e-ink display products, including a phone case that's powered by just NFC, as well as a color e-ink reader from Bigme, and I was reminded of how much I love this type of display technology in general. So it got me thinking, what are other types of e-ink products that we haven't checked out yet? And I stumbled across the category of smartwatches or wearables. So the subject of this video is going to be the Fossil Collider Hybrid HR smartwatch, which has a e-ink display instead of a conventional IPS LCD or a AMOLED screen. Based on my research process, I came across a couple of candidates. It seemed like there was one from Bernie that also has a e-ink panel, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be really a smartwatch, meaning it's lacking functions like a heart rate monitor and connectivity to your phone. There's another e-ink display watch model called the Sony FES watch, which is also really cool because the entire watch strap portion is still a continuous strip of the screen. But this watch is also not really a real smartwatch. Similarly, there's no heart rate monitor, and it even uses a cell-based battery that you have to swap out. And I was surprised that Fossil have been making a couple generations of these e-ink smartwatches, or really hybrid smartwatches. This one in particular is the original hybrid HR, so it's by no means new to the market. In fact, I'm really late to the party because as I'm making this video, I also stumbled across an article from The Verge stating that Fossil is actually leaving the world of smartwatches behind. So Gen 6 watches, including their hybrid series, as well as Android Wear-powered watches, might be their last. And the fact that they're one of the only hybrid smartwatch makers to use a e-ink screen, I think just makes the situation that much more sad. And as for pricing, I would say it's mostly reasonable. The Gen 6 model retails for around $200 depending on the specific variant. They have models made for women, as well as more of a wellness edition that's kind of the regular model, and a slightly more pro model that has extra accents on the crown if you want something a little bit more rugged looking. But functionality as well as hardware are all going to be mostly identical. And then the model that we have here, the original generation, is technically Gen 5 and can be found for even lower cost, closer to around $100, sometimes even lower than that at half the price, as you can tell. So it's now falling into more of the budget territory, more or less, as far as a smartwatch is concerned. Aside from the Fossil label, this company actually is owning a couple of different watch brands at this point in time, so it also goes by another name called the Jorn in other markets such as Europe, for example, with slight differences just in the marketing as well as some of the maybe branding, but again, the display inside as well as the overall feature set are all going to be completely the same. I'll also mention that if you're curious about differences between this original generation versus the Gen 6, it's mostly that the newer model has a bit of an upgraded bio trackers to incorporate SpO2 blood oxygen monitoring, which is missing on the Gen 5, as well as a built-in microphone that you can use for Amazon Alexa control for a voice assistant on the watch, although it doesn't have a built-in speaker, and you have to still be connected to your phone via Bluetooth for that part to work. So if Alexa integration as well as SpO2 aren't important metrics, then again you consider the Gen 5 original model if you want to save a few bucks, but that's going to be up to you. Now, there, of course, are a few benefits to having an e-ink display, and one of them is going to be outdoor readability. As we've touched on in prior videos on this tech, it also consumes very little power, at least when it's not refreshing the pixels. It can actually sit on a static image persistently without draining, and that's why this watch in particular can get upwards of 2 weeks of usage with just heart rate monitoring on and also step counting before you have to recharge it again. And the third advantage of a hybrid smartwatch is the more classy look. It kind of disguises itself as just a regular watch from afar, so you can use it for business professional settings without people maybe staring as much. If you're wearing an Apple Watch, for instance, it's quite discreet and even comes with the leather strap options like the one that you see here. That adds to the elegance. And compared to all of the previous hybrid smartwatches that I've covered, Fossil's approach is definitely my favorite because all of those other models usually crammed the notification part into a tiny little display section on the watch. It meant that if you're reading back notifications, it had to scroll across, it was kind of awkward, and compared to this, the entire surface is actually quite a large display, as well as change the watch dial that will allow you to have a different look and vibe depending on the outfit that you're wearing because of the much larger screen size over it. But it is just so cleverly disguised that you don't really notice it if you aren't staring close enough. And for times where you are actually using it in darker situations, because e-ink screens don't have a backlight, there is a front light made out of LEDs that you can activate by tapping twice, as you can tell there. reminiscent of the glow light found on, say, Casio or Timex digital watches. With that being said, of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are still some downsides to a hybrid smartwatch, and obviously functionality, even though this is much improved with a larger display, is still not going to be quite as exhaustive as a Android Wear or Apple Watch. For instance, if you want to install third-party apps, that's not going to be possible on this model, and it doesn't have built-in GPS either, so you can't really track your route if you're running outdoors. As far as the hardware is concerned, I would say Fossil have done a pretty good job. It's built out of a solid chunk of metal, even on the back portion, aside from just the heart rate section here, touching your skin is plastic, but then the outer parameter here is metal. It is a little bit on the sharp side, though, as far as some of the corners are concerned, but not bad. You can see the heart rate sensor start to flash. Position on the left and right are going to be the charging contacts, so you can top it up in around just 2 hours. The watch is rated for splash as well as rain showers, but it's not meant to be submerged in water for things like swimming. But if you often get the front wet, I would probably recommend one of the fabric material straps instead, and they can be swapped out quite easily. Located on the right-hand side is going to be a crown key. On this one, it doesn't really rotate, but you can tap on it once to go into the full menu of different micro apps that you can track and take a look at notifications. There are 2 more shortcut keys up and down. The top one can be pressed to trigger a dashboard of all your health stats from the previous day, the current 24 hours, in terms of steps, calories burned, as well as hours slept. And then down below here, you can also do a quick heart rate measurement. Now, the crown key down below here can be pressed once to trigger a music control if you're connected to your phone via Bluetooth. You can also long hold on the top key for a couple seconds to hide all of the kind of dials on the screen from view if you want a totally clean look. Similarly, a long hold on the bottom key for a couple of seconds will show up all the notifications that you can read through on the watch instead. And true to the hybrid name, there are physical dials that will rotate on top of the display. And the dials themselves are also glow in the dark. So you can technically show up to 2 different time zones per se. For example, one that we have here for demo purposes, and a second time zone that's going to be shown in one of the other clock faces that you can set it to. So you're able to see 2 times at once. And also a regular smartwatch. This is a Amazfit GTR 2 series. As you can tell, they're having a OLED screen instead, and overall I would say it's not too far off in terms of overall dimensions. So now navigating through some more of the advanced settings, the first one here being notifications. Move up and down to read the entire message, as you can tell, just a little bit more easily, as well as any news articles, as compared to the small ticker screen on those other hybrid style watches we've seen in the past. Now, the presence of the physical dial in the middle will sometimes disrupt the text a little bit, so you can sometimes tap to kind of move it in a slightly different position and then it will move back into place, but it will still partially obstruct some portions of the screen. That, I guess, is one slight disadvantage of having a screen behind the actual dial, but overall it's not too bad. You can still make out, for the most part, what is happening just by clicking along. We also have the ability to check out the current weather conditions. Again, it's synced over via Bluetooth on this watch, so there is no Wi-Fi or cellular built on in. Quite simple, so it needs to be connected for you to see the current conditions. We can also take a look at the humidity level as well as the UV levels as well, so quite basic but does the job. And of course, e-ink displays will have a little bit more latency compared to IPS LCD and OLED, so you may have to be just a little bit more patient for some of the animations here to move around, but all in all, not bad for what it is. You can also find your phone. If you are connected by Bluetooth, it will just ring an alarm or chime on your phone instead. There's also a separate page for full settings that you can control on the watch. For example, the front light here you can actually manually turn on or off. Otherwise, you can also go into a do not disturb mode. For example, if you're in a theater, you can prevent any incoming notifications. That will just turn off kind of the haptic vibration motor, for example. You can also make the menus in terms of the text size a little bit larger or smaller based on your preferences. And the next one here is also the vibration intensity for, again, incoming notifications. It will buzz, so you can make this haptic motor a little bit stronger or weaker, as well as turn on or off the heart rate monitoring from here as well, which is good. But again, the interval of measurements can't really be done. It's always going to be set at roughly 2 minutes per measurement. Swapped orientation for the display. So for example, if you're wearing on your left hand versus the right hand, you can tap on that and it will actually flip around accordingly. So depending on what you prefer, The UI here is pretty well optimized. The next one here is going to be for workouts. So on here, you can still start and track a couple of sessions, and after you sync the data over to your phone, it will know that you've spent, for example, 15 minutes, 30 minutes jogging, cycling, running, something like that. The number of sports, though, are definitely going to be more limited, but it will take your heart rate at a faster interval, basically second per second, when you are doing the sport activity, and more precisely track your calories as well as your distance walked during that entire activity. Decent if you just need some light functionality, similar to on a fitness tracker, I would say. The next feature over is going to be a simple timer, but still, again, good to have here. So you can set different durations just by increasing or decreasing it. And in similar fashion, you also have a basic stopwatch function on here as well. Technically, this thing has an always-on display as well, compared to, say, a regular smartwatch with an OLED or an IPS LCD screen that has to kind of wake up first or consume more power. And then you have just the dials, they're moving mechanically on the surface. So you can see the time without having to wait for anything at all. So here's the Fossil smartwatch app. It connects to some of their other wearable products as well, actually very quickly. Once Bluetooth and location services are turned on, it just takes really a second or two for everything to sync, and had no issues when it comes to saving data or connecting to the watch in my testing. And afterwards, you'll be able to take a closer look at some of your stats, since, again, the information shown on the watch is still a little bit on a limited side, but at least on the app here, we can more closely see the sleep data, such as time we've fallen asleep, as well as the breakdown of awake versus light versus deep sleep. And overall, I would say the sleep tracking accuracy has been good. However, it doesn't have true 24/7 tracking like some of the Amazfit as well as Apple Watch. So if you're taking a nap, for example, it's not necessarily going to count that as sleep. You have to be really in the evening hours. But during those hours, it will count it automatically for you. And the duration was not too far off compared to some competitors, the aforementioned Amazfit as well as Apple Watch. It's just if you're taking naps or if your sleep schedule is more erratic, just know that it's going to be a little weaker versus some of the top tier smartwatches there. Overall, though, step counting as well as heart rate were thankfully quite good when it comes to the accuracy. Didn't notice too much discrepancies here. So the UI is pretty elegant. That being said, you don't really get a breakdown of times of day, for example, hour by hour that you were active. So that is one interesting thing. It only shows the aggregate data per day when it comes to steps. Now, the same goes for, again, heart rate. On here, it does show a heart rate curve during every 2-minute interval, so it's a little bit more detailed, and you can see your high versus low as well as averages a little bit more comfortably. We can also set up an alarm directly from the app, and when it rings, for example, in the morning, it will again use the haptic motors to vibrate to kind of wake you up. That can be useful. And then tapping on the watch dial up top, you're able to check out the battery percentage remaining on the watch, see if there's any firmware updates, as well as Find My Watch will vibrate the watch instead if you are connected via Bluetooth, that is. And also tap on Wellness to connect the data with other services, including Google Fit, as well as change what your goals are for a number of steps you want to reach per day. Now, finally, on the main page, if we just tap on the watch, this is how you change the watch dial. And that's, I think, the really cool part about this particular model. Because of the larger e-ink panel, you have plenty of these options that look really classy in their minimalist black and white approach. Again, this is a classic e-ink screen, so there is no color introduced on this model yet, but still is already looking quite good. Currently, we have this default one with 3 rings that shows, again, time information in a different zone, as well as battery status and date, but I can also change it to something like a more minimalist style with only, for example, 1 ring instead, and it takes really just a split second, and the screen here will refresh. So going over a few other examples, this one also introduces another outer parameter of additional kind of accents on the edge there. And here is one that's going to be a little bit more fancy, with also your current resting heart rate being displayed up top, as well as options that are going to invert the color just to white. Again, since it's a e-ink panel, showing white or black doesn't really matter. It's going to consume the same amount of power. So on and so forth. So you get the idea, plenty of kind of attractive looking options. And under My Style, you can also create your own. Add any photo that you take from the phone as the wallpaper instead, or of course download images from the internet. And you can also adjust the contrast, softness, exposure of the image before you send it along as a preview here. And when you're satisfied, it's going to look something like this, for example, and we can tap on Save. We can also add custom elements for each of the widgets, essentially, the 3 spots here you can tap on and have this display, again, weather information, current temperature, steps, heart rate, a second time zone, date information, active minutes that you were performing there in the day, as well as battery status, things like that. Maybe we'll tap on a second dial there just to say maybe the date. And if we are satisfied, we can also click on some of the outer parameters here to make these individual widgets show up a little bit differently from a visual perspective, darker versus lighter. And let's say we are just good to go. We're going to then tap on OK. And now it'll be synced over to the smartwatch, as you can tell there. So the background is set to this kind of Pokemon-inspired image, also looking really funky. So you get the idea. It's a lot more customizable versus pretty much all the other hybrid smartwatches. You're just stuck with the dial that it comes in, like a regular watch. And even a background icon can be set as well. Even the position of these dials can be rearranged freely on the entire watch surface. So actually quite good in terms of adjustability and customization. Finally, the next tab over also allows you to customize what those 2 keys will correspond to as far as shortcuts are concerned. So right now, again, the top will automatically be set to your dashboard of activity status, whereas the bottom is music control. But you can change this to a different function that you prefer, such as workout tracking or a timer. Last but not least, under My Preferences, you can also turn on different types of notifications, what types of apps can pass through to the watch, as well as whether you want wellness tracking and auto workout detection to be turned on. So for things like running, biking, walking, if it detects that you've been performing that activity for more than 3 minutes, it will trigger an automatic session to be captured, which is pretty good. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Fossil Collider Hybrid HR. And I'm definitely late to the party here, as I just didn't realize something like this even existed. I think that shows maybe some parts of Fossil's marketing that could have been stronger, to be honest, but as the saying goes, better late than never. And this is actually a really cool hybrid smartwatch. It's still not the most powerful smartwatch by any means, but if you're looking for something as an alternative that does look really classy, surprisingly close to just a regular business watch, but has a few more tracking and notification management functions tucked underneath, I think this is actually a very good model, even though, again, Fossil is unfortunately really no longer making new watches going forward. You can learn more details if interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Fossil Hybrid HR.